Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the WIDLWOODS Beekeeping Chat, and tonight we have Chuck Coop from Chuck Honeybees. I hope I'm saying that right, but thank you, Chuck, for joining us tonight. And before we get into our live stream, if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into beekeeping, if you could.
Yeah. Hey, Grayson. Well, thank you for inviting me. Glad to be back. Yeah, my name is Chuck Cook. I'm a beekeeper down here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I've been beekeeping for about 16 years. So, longer than some, not as long as many. And I am a master beekeeper here in the state of Florida now, working on the next level. But I only mention that because there are different paths in beekeeping. Some people go down the academic path, and some people go down the commercial path and the hobbyist path. There's many, many, many paths. And I'm having a lot of fun working with University of Florida through the Master Beekeeper program, both through education, learning, and mentorship. Also supporting Hives for Heroes. I am a 25-year U.S. Navy veteran, served in the military as a pilot, carrier-based aviation in the Persian Gulf era. And it's good to bring beekeeping to veterans that perhaps are looking for something to give them a foundation, give them something that they can look forward to and focus their time and energy on should they need those sort of things in their lives. But let's talk about bees.
Yeah.
I'm a hobbyist for sure. This is not my profession. Obviously we all make a little bit of money from honey and selling bees, and I also raise queens and rear my own queens in the spring. And so it's I guess you could say I'm profitable, but it's not what pays the bills or buys the groceries. But with that, I also have the liberty of experimenting, flexing my schedule every year, trying new things without necessarily the worry of a collapse of my apiary or something that perhaps would stop income from flowing in if I don't get a great crop that year or something like that. I don't have the stress of that over my head. And I think with that, I'm at about 30 hives now. I don't have a whole lot of property. I have a couple out yards, and I don't like to travel a long ways for where I put my bees, mostly because of my work schedule, because I'm still working full time as a commercial pilot up in New York and Boston area. So I do still fly the Airbus A321 full time. And that is, obviously my profession. So that is where I have to focus my time. But, beekeeping it's a passion of mine. I picked it up from probably my grandfather and just kind of kept it going. I enjoy it a lot. I don't think I know where the end of this journey is. And like many have said, I think I'm going to die with more questions than I had when I started. And that's kind of where I am in this. It's a deep, deep hole I'm in. Anyway, that's the basics of me, Grayson.
Oh, yeah, nice story. And when we're talking about honey and stuff, yesterday I actually just got done bottling honey because we extracted in July, and then we had it in buckets, and we finally got it extracted. So we put it in some bottles, 12 ounce and some 8-ounce jars, and we actually sold a little bit of it today. So we're kind of selling it locally, and I'm same with you. I'm kind of a very small beekeeper, hobbyist around here. I do it in my free time. It's really fun to do, and I try to do videos on it, and Hives for Heroes too. When we're talking about that, I've actually had Stan Gore on here from Hives from Heroes a while back. So we've talked about Hives for Heroes on here before too, and it's a good little program for veterans and all these different great things for veterans to get into beekeeping, right? And that's just another thing that's great, for that aspect of it too, But I've had him on, and we try to get a lot of people on here, including yourself, to just talk about bees. It's fun to talk about bees. That's what I love to do, and I think a lot of our beekeepers like to do it too.
Yeah. Well, I have a good bucket story. So this is something that happened to me this year that never happened to me before. And maybe it's because I'm like in my 16th year, and maybe this is a lesson you can remember. For the first time, I was putting honey in buckets that I've had forever. These good, solid 5-gallon buckets that just have been working me for years. Well, this year I put honey in these buckets, and had a pretty good crop. And as I was stacking these buckets up like I've always done, I went back out on my shed the next day, and there was honey everywhere, all over the floor. The plastic had just gotten brittle, and the weight of these buckets on themselves with the honey, the buckets just cracked. So as a technique now, and I'm going to recommend to you and anyone else listening, write the year you buy these buckets on the bucket and create some number of no more than 5 years or something, because these plastic buckets don't last forever, and you don't want to realize it after you put honey in them and put some weight on them, or do some sort of brittle test. I mean, I've had a brittle lid before or something like that I've dealt with, but man, it is as you can imagine, when you spill a 5-gallon bucket of honey on a wooden floor, it's a mess.
Oh yeah. Good tip there too, and a lot of people will find use of that. And I haven't had that problem, but I could tell that it'd probably be a big mess. And we
Yeah.
actually, when we got honey the last time, not yesterday, the last time we put it in um jars and stuff like that, it was a mess. So this time we figured out like a little way to do it. We use like type of funnel, like how you have the big honey bucket gate. We use a funnel, and then we put it into the jars. So we kind of tried to do something different. It worked pretty good yesterday when we um put them all into jars, since we
Good.
extracted it like what was it, like July. It was like late July, because I was gonna try to do it like early June or maybe late June, but then it ended up being late July whenever I was able to finally get it extracted. But we were able to get that done. We're going to start selling it locally around here. We don't do it all the way for income and stuff like that, not like a commercial level or anything, or even a sideliner level. We just do it to just a little bit of money here and there. If we can sell it locally, we'll do that. It's really,
Yeah.
really cool to do that too. And but I do kind of want to talk about a little bit about kind of the the year we're in. I kind of just want to ask you kind of what's going on in your neck of the woods, kind of what you're doing now. What's your goal for the rest of this year, trying to get your bees ready for winter?
Yeah, these are good questions. Thank you. So I started my beekeeping channel, Chuck's Honeybees, on YouTube, honestly, out of frustration of not having hyper local information to my area down in Zone 9B in Jacksonville. We got a few YouTubers kind of in South Florida. You got a couple in Louisiana that do a great job, in Alabama with Bruce, and
That's
you got
right.
Mike and over there. You got several over in that area. And then, of course, you kind of go north up, and there's several as you kind of go to the Midwest, and then all the way up to Canada, right? But there was nobody in my area. So as I was looking for clues, as I was kind of growing into my hobby, I just didn't have the videos or the indications of timing of what I needed to be doing when, or perhaps how long the flow might last, or all of these details. And I just said, well, I'm going to just start recording it. And that's what I did. And I've gotten pretty heavy into the brood minder and the scales and things like that, measuring flows with data, and recording that each year for the followers on my channel that want to watch locally. But where we are right now in Jacksonville, and honestly, it's this week we're starting our fall flow. We have a fall flow from basically the month of October, well, which starts tomorrow. Obviously you can go a week or two either way based on rain and everything. And as most folks know, we had a hurricane go through Florida last week, which dumped a lot of rain and a lot of wind. So early last week, while that hurricane was going through, obviously that was not good foraging time. But what that also did is dumped a lot of rain that might end up affecting this flow during October quite a bit if that nectar starts pushing out from that rain we got last week and the week before. So it's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch this fall flow based off of that hurricane timing. Should we have good weather the rest of the month of October where there's no disruptions? Obviously, there's some more storms brewing down the Caribbean that could really throw a wrench in that too. So basically, with the fall flow starting the 1st of October now, and I also define the flow in my area when nectar's obviously coming out, but that's a nebulous thing for most beekeepers to know because we don't have little teaspoons to measure nectar for flowers. So what I do with my hive scales is when they start adding weight beyond the level they consume. So when a hive is consuming honey, they, and they're bringing in honey, they're staying level. If they're consuming more than they're bringing in, the weight is decreasing. But as they're bringing in more than they're consuming, the weight starts increasing. And that's what I call the flow for the purposes of my audience in my area, is they're bringing in more than they're consuming. So they're adding weight. And for beekeepers, that's when you need to have your supers on, or you need to have some frames or space for them to store the honey they're bringing in, whether it's in a super or even just in a deep to get them ready for winter or whatever you're going to overwinter your bees in. So about a week and a half ago, I added empty supers with drawn wax on, just so they had extra room to store that honey should the flow be good. And I also while I'm adding those supers, I crack a hive or two open. I double check for Varroa mites just to make sure my mites are in a good situation. And one of my hives is a little bit high, so I just said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and start a Varroa vaporization treatment now, because the rest of the hives are okay, but one of them was a little bit high, and it's just that time of year where you can kind of knock them back a little bit before they go into winter too. And you can use OA vapor with the honey supers on. And that's one of those treatments there. But there is also, don't forget, and many people may not know this, there's a new OA commercial strip. I've been making the extended release oxalic acid strips for a long time now off of Randy Oliver's recipe, but now you can buy it. I think it's called Varoxan. Fox Hound Bee Company sells them, and so you can buy these extended release strips now if you do want to try that legally in the U.S. There's a few states that are exempt from that. They're not allowed to use it. I think Hawaii and California, and there's a handful of others. So make sure you read the label if you're looking for these solutions. So Varroa treatments, honey supers, monitoring the flow with my scales, and obviously watching the flowers bloom. And my flower indicators in Jacksonville, Florida, Zone 9B, is the goldenrod and the golden rain tree are the two big yellow flowers that I look for right at the beginning of when they start putting weight on.
Oh yeah, we have goldenrod too down here. Goldenrod's starting to bloom down here. That's mainly our biggest flower that we have that our bees take in, and right now we have a whole bunch of pollen coming in. So I know they're getting that pollen off the goldenrod as well, and some nectar too. And I'm also feeding a little bit down here. I've actually started since a little bit early September. Just doing a little bit of feeding because some of my colonies were actually pretty light, trying to bring the weight up just a little bit. And then since this flow will be going strong, that's actually going strong now, but it'll be even stronger here in October as well. Then we'll be able to I don't, and we'll have the bees will be bringing in a lot much more of the nectar and stuff as well. I don't know if I'm gonna do any harvest this year since we already got the
Yeah.
honey from spring, so I'll just let them take that in. But I do want to make sure that they don't get too much in there. I don't want them to get too filled up. Honey bound. That's definitely not something I want. I just have to monitor them. I've just been kind of going out there and kind of checking them once in a while as much as I can to my ability, just to check for queens, and did a little bit of treating with Apigard this year. I haven't really treated much with Apigard but once, and but I try to do it again, and I did a little testing too. I got to test again because I just got done treating, so I got to go out there at some point once I find some time. Hopefully this week if I get a chance, and go out there and do some testing and see how those treatments did. But I did do some testing before, so we'll see where we're going.
Well, good. You mentioned a good point about checking on queens. I didn't mention that either. When you go through and out of super or do anything to your hives like you're doing too, just pop a frame and look for eggs, right?
Right.
Just make sure you're queen right. A new beekeeper will ignore. I don't want to say they're ignoring it, but they won't recognize a queenless hive. And if you go all the way through winter, you're just asking for the dead out early on. So, and there's still time to requeen a hive if you got a nuke going or something like that. It's getting a little late to do, of course, a walkaway split or anything like that. But, my mantra is I have a replacement nuke for every single production hive I have. I've got at least a 3-framer or a 5-framer or something with a good queen in it that's mated, that if I needed to throw it in a production hive that I want to make honey next spring, that I can. Obviously, everybody can't have 1-for-1 replacements of their queens, but over 16 years, that's where I've evolved to. As I said, I want to have that many queens available, and ultimately I end up providing queens to my neighbors or the other beekeepers in the area that need them, because I usually have more than I need. But it's also a place that I wanted to be with both my queen rearing and my own brood production. So queen rightness is an important thing to check. And learn how to read the front of your hive. You can usually tell a hive is not queen right by looking for, in the South, if you got pollen coming out of the base, there's small hive beetles in there, right? They're eating you alive. If you look at a frame and it's got some kind of cobwebby stuff in it, the wax moths have already moved in. Now the wax moths didn't kill your hive, but they moved in because something else killed your hive, whether it was Varroa or small hive beetles took over too. But these are all good indicators and good things to do this time of year to kind of keep that conversation going.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like you said, I've been checking, make sure all my colonies are queen right, and most of all my, pretty much all my queens are, they're laying really good and they're doing very good. And another thing that's also interesting that I got 2 colonies that are unbelievably, strong, and they're actually raising drones right now. It's like, I popped them up, I see some drones in there, so that's kind of interesting to see, which I'm sure they'll kill them off here soon anyway. But it's,
Yeah.
that tells me they're strong, which they're not gonna last long because we're getting more into fall, and I'll start seeing them all being killed off. But the last couple 2 months, I haven't been seeing many drones, so that was kind of interesting to see them starting to raise them, and I've been kind of keeping up with the queens and stuff like that. They're laying really good here. It's unbelievable what they're doing, and so that's important, like you said. Trying to make sure your queens are doing good, and just pop up a frame and make sure you have
Yeah.
eggs and larvae and things like that, and you're good. You're pretty much good to go. And a lot of times, if I keep going, even if I see eggs, that's just to look around and see kind of where my kind of how much honey I have. If I'm heavy, if
Mm-hmm.
I need to feed and stuff. That's the main reason why. If I even go any deeper, or if because most times I don't need to. If I see eggs and larvae, I'll just put them back up. And I know there's as long as there's eggs and stuff like that, then I'm pretty much good to
Yeah.
go.
Well, I mean, every time you open the hive, it's a risk of disrupting something that's going on, possibly killing the queen if you don't know how to be gentle enough to keep from rolling a queen. And even an experienced beekeeper can roll a queen and kill her. So obviously, the least disruption possible, especially going into a flow when you'd like them to build up. You want to kill your queen then if you can help it. But there's no way to learn about beekeeping without getting in the hive either. So I'm not trying to discourage people from getting in their hives. They need to do that, but I guess the least possible inspection necessary for the objective, and for queen rightness, just checking for eggs is really all you need to do. Obviously, a little bit of a brood pattern check too. If you making sure they're not too spotty or anything like that, they'd be cause for disease of another type that you might need to check on. Good things to think about.
Absolutely. The next topic I did kind of want to talk about is feeding. So I just kind of want to ask you kind of what you do for feeding, kind of how you do it, and also maybe some things that people might want to know that could help them out whenever they're trying to feed their bees to boost them up.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do, well, obviously, like most people do, I do one-to-one sugar syrup, and I mess the one-to-one a little heavier, a little light, depending on the time of year. So it's a slight deviation from that. I did do some experimentation this year and posted a video on it. You can go as thin, as 4 parts water to 1 part sugar, and the bees will take it. Obviously, you're adding that much water, they're going to have to desiccate that off. So that's not how they put on weight. But when you get a really, really hungry hive and they just need some food and some sugar, they don't need all of that. This is a very debatable subject. There's been a few papers on it, but I did an experiment where I put out 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-4, and 1-to-6 or something like that. And I was like, what do the bees prefer? And believe it or not, they actually prefer like the 1-to-4 syrup over the 1-to-1 syrup as far as what they would go to first. Now, and when I say 1-to-4, I may be getting my numbers backwards, but I'm obviously talking more water than sugar. And that ratio is about what you put in a hummingbird feeder, which closely represents what the nectar sweetness is with the sucrose. So anyway, it's fun to experiment with that to see what the bees prefer. Doesn't always mean they're going to get the weight they need or the carbohydrates they need to get them through a period of time. But it is fun to think about that. I do have some things that most people don't do that I do with my sugar syrup. Obviously, here in the South, you put sugar syrup into a jar or on top of a hive for a few days or over a week, and you'll start to get mold in your sugar water if you leave it out in the sun and it gets there too long. For about 5 years, I've been doing something by adding thymolized syrup to my sugar water, which is the technique I do to keep any sort of fermentation from happening and any mold from forming. And there's some recipes that have been passed around for generations of this recipe. The label you might find if you were to Google it is called the Manly syrup recipe or the Manly recipe. And it essentially is taking sugar water and diluting thymol crystals into it. It's got the smell of thymol, like you might imagine. But once you get this syrup mixed up and you put it into a jar, when I make a 5-gallon bucket of syrup, with a 25-pound bag of sugar from Walmart or whatever, I take 2 capfuls of this syrup, which is concentrated thymol, and I put it in my bucket and I stir it up in there. And really, it keeps my fermentation and my mold down to almost zero. So I really don't have a problem with that. So it's a good little trick. Some people have heard that they can use bleach in their syrup, and they can do that. And the bees don't mind a little bit of bleach. Obviously, some people are a little bit more against using things like that in their syrup, but I think that is also another very reasonable way to do it, as long as you don't overdo it. And the bees will let you know if you overdid it, because they won't take it if it's got too much of a bleach smell or taste to it. But in the South, you do need to manage that a little bit, or you're just always changing out your syrup, or you're only putting out a small amount of syrup that they can consume, and then you're going back out the next day to refill it, or the day after. So just a small little technique there for some of your viewers that might be interested in. I typically feed when there's pollen on and they don't have weight. So I'm not feeding right now because there's a good flow and my hives are mostly heavy and they're adding weight. So I didn't need to do that, but I've got a bucket mixed up should I need to. So I'm ready, just like you are. When they get light, you can give them a little bit. But my next big timing is January 1st. January 1st is within plus or minus 2 days of when my maples start to bloom. And when those maples start to bloom in January, there is no nectar flowing. And because I like to graft my queens on Valentine's Day, February 14th, I've got to start feeding in that January 1st time frame, once that natural pollen comes in, to get the hives essentially ready to get those drones out there to have the drone fields, so that grafting queens will be available after 3 weeks after grafting on February 14th. So feeding regimen for me starts when the maple blooms. For me, the maple blooms on January 1st, New Year's Day. And that timing can go for almost any climate, north or south. You just when your maple blooms, and you got that natural pollen source is a good another signal there. I do some pollen sometimes. I'm not doing it right now. In the South, you have to be very careful with pollen substitutes, whether you buy them or make them. I happen to make my own patties out of Ultra Bee, because the small hive beetles will get in there and lay eggs and just tear a hive up if you put more pollen in there than they can consume. So you've got to really be careful with that. There's a few tricks you can work on, or some recipes, and Dr. Bartlett up at the University of Georgia is working on some ideas that I think are probably going to come to fruition over the next 5 or 10 years, of additional ways we can fight small hive beetles in our hives. And I'm watching that very closely, and perhaps I'll even work with him or Dr. Jamie Ellis on some of these ideas with my Master Craftsman certification next year. Anyway, so that's feeding. That's pollen and sugar and a few of the next things we got coming up over the next season.
Oh yeah, definitely. And DC has a question about the thymolized syrup, and he asked, "Do you think that helps with mites, Chuck?"
Tracheal mites was another thing thymol was used for in the past. And if he's thinking about tracheal mites, the answer is probably yes, but we don't really think about tracheal mites very much any longer. I do not think it has anything to do with Varroa mites. So maybe there's some confusion with the term mite versus the tracheal mite that we used to worry about back in the 70s and 80s, but not Varroa mites that are the parasitic mites on the back. I don't know of any way to fight them other than with the treatments that we have today commercially. I don't think there's anything you can give to your bees at the moment to fight them.
Oh, absolutely. And then the next topic I do want to talk about, since we're kind of on the verge of mites, is I was going to just ask you kind of what you use to treat for Varroa mites, and similar to the last question, kind of maybe some things that you do that might be interesting to other beekeepers that could learn
Yeah.
from what.
Great. Well, mites are obviously the current pest we're fighting. And let's specifically say the Varroa destructor mite, the Varroa mite in the United States. We have other mites that are probably coming. with triple lats coming. They're in Asia now. They're not here yet. We have other pests such as the yellow-legged hornet that is in Savannah, Georgia now. That is another sort of predator to our bees that we have to think about. But with respect to the Varroa destructor mite, you know, you have to manage your mites. I'm not here to tell people that you have to treat. I'm not here to tell people how to treat, but I am here to tell you, you know, you ought to be measuring because if you're not measuring your mites, you're pretending that they're not there, or you're just assuming that whatever this creature is can manage through it. And I'll make an analogy with some pets that most people know and love, such as their dogs or their cats, right? You know, you could bring a dog or a cat into your home and you could make the same sort of analogy, but well, they're genetically, you know, dogs, they can live in the wild, you know, they can go feral and they'll be just fine. But you wouldn't bring a dog or a cat into your home and not even consider treating for fleas or ticks, would you? You let them live outside, you let them roam, and they're going to get infested. They're going to get sores. They're going to bring them into your house, and they're going to spread to other things. And next thing you know, you're going to be itching from fleas that, you know, when they come inside to eat. So as beekeepers, we are caretakers of these animals. You know, we chose to take them out of the trees. You know, if you're being a beekeeper, right? You know, you decided to bring them into your yard or your farm or your property and put them in, you know, square boxes with frames that they perhaps wouldn't have chosen themselves. So make the same decision you would for any other animal you bring into your home and say, let's take care of them. Let's make sure they're able to adapt to the situation that I put them in. Now, the bees have been here for, some would say, 37 million years, and they're going to be here long after the human species is gone. And I believe that too. They will adapt to this, but they probably won't adapt to it on the timescales of the seasons that we humans think about for managing hives, taking honey from them, and propagating them and selling them for commercial reasons. So that was kind of a long story just to kind of give a reason to check your mites and to know what they are. And if they are bad, then do something about it. You don't have to use a chemical if you're trying to be treatment free, but start thinking about brood breaks. Start thinking about other things that you can do without chemicals if that's the way you want to go. So back to your question, I use oxalic acid almost exclusively in several forms. That's a selfish choice of trying to stay as organic as I possibly can, staying away from the harsher chemicals, not having success with formic acid in the South because of the heat we have here and some queen kills I've had in the past from using that organic solution unsuccessfully. So I've gone to extended release oxalic acid over cardboard strips. I'm also using some sponges that Randy Oliver successfully used. And also I use the new Oxvat vaporizer that uses my DeWalt battery system that is very portable and convenient. I've had vaporizers over the years that hook up to 12-volt batteries and plug into 12-volt outlets and everything like that. So vaporization has been a technique I've used for years. But vaporization is not a one and done technique. You know, we've kind of learned that you have to kind of do 3 to 4 vaporizations every 5 to 7 days to get all of the mites that are underneath the wax cappings, because the phoretic mites are only on the top that are killed by the vapor. So oxalic acid vapor, and then some sort of extended treatment if you're not getting in your hives to manage them beyond that. There are other treatments that I'm not using, but if I were not using vapor, I would be using some of these thiamol solutions, HopGuard, some of these other sort of things. But, you know, as a hobbyist and kind of a sideliner, I try to be novel and creative and somewhat of a garage chemist in my ways of finding solutions that I can, you know, kind of buy inexpensively and create and distribute, manage myself without having to buy a commercial solution every single time. You know, I need a treatment. So I try to stay ahead of that. It was a long-winded solution, but that's my philosophy on mites and how I treat them.
Absolutely. And I use treatments, and the main two things I've used were probably Apigard, Thymol, and Apivar in the past. Those are the main two things that I've used, and I do test as much as I can. Like I said earlier, I do got to go back and test sometime this week to make sure everything went well, which I need to do that sometime this week. As long as I can get out there and have the chance, as long as weather's nice, which I think down here in Alabama, we're down here in Alabama, southeastern Alabama, so we're not too far away from you, and we have some nice weather down here, and it's unbelievable. And the bees are flying. Today they've been flying, and it's some nice weather, and it should be nice weather all week, so they'll be able to get out and find some nectar and some pollen from the from the goldenrod and some other stuff as well.
Yeah. It's just like a habit you have to create. It's kind of like leaving your gym shoes out. So you'll just put them on and go for a run or go to the gym, or, leaving a reminder to do something. I need to wash the car. You leave the bucket out, whatever the reminder is, leave your mite checking bottle just out. So that when you're in your hives, you see it, you just got that little scratch in the back of your head that goes, let me just check one hive. And even if you're just checking one hive when you go to the apiary, it doesn't take very long, but at least you checked one hive. And hey, guess what? If you get a 0 mite count or low mite count, yeah, you know what? You're going to feel good about your whole apiary. That may not be true, but at least you checked one hive. But if you got a high mite count on the one hive you checked, you might go, oh my gosh, my entire apiary may have a problem. And then you might go check another 2 or 3. So it's just about creating habits and patterns so that as a beekeeper, you got your own self-consciousness to make you do the chores that sometimes it's easy to forget or just be lazy to do.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's kind of what I do as well. It's a mindset I have, and that's kind of what I do, and great stuff. I guess the next topic, since people, I guess, are feeding and stuff like that, and you mentioned a little bit about small hive beetles, and I just kind of want to talk about that for a split second.
Yep.
Down here, I will say real quick. Last year, it was an insane problem last year down here in Alabama because last year I'm sure it affected you. We kind of had a little cold snap early. It killed everything, and that whole year, and especially the main worst part of it was the dearth, and so many beetles were in the colonies, and all my colonies kept on absconding because of these beetles. But anyway, I was gonna kind of ask you, was do you have a problem, which I'm sure down here in South we do, and kind of what do you do to try to I wouldn't say treat for them, but kind of try to keep your levels down.
Yeah. So I thought a lot about this too, much like Varroa mites, and I have some good philosophies on how I try to do this. So I sort of treat small, I kind of gave you my dog analogy with the fleas, with the Varroa mites, and how you need to take care of your pets. I think of small hive beetles like I think of mosquitoes in the South. You're not going to kill every mosquito by swatting at them. They're just going to be there. But if you're a smart landowner or property owner, you slowly start to learn to not leave little puddles of water everywhere. Leave your flower pots turned up so the mosquitoes have water that they can breed in. Do the best you can to stop the breeding cycle of a mosquito, and ultimately you're going to have fewer mosquitoes that end up stinging you in your backyard. That's the same philosophy I have with small hive beetles. If you've ever looked at a hive that has been overtaken by small hive beetles, you will see tens of thousands of what look like maggots, but they're small hive beetle larvae that are getting ready. They just hatched. They just ate all your pollen. They probably killed your hive or slimed your hive so the bees will no longer use it. But then those larvae are going to leave the hive and go into the ground and pupate. And they're going to go into the dirt about 4 to 6 inches, and they're going to crawl in the dirt, and they're going to come out of the ground after a period of weeks, and they're going to fly away as small hive beetles. Just like those mosquito larvae, laying eggs in that water, they're going to come right back around a week later. They're going to be stinging you in your ear, and you're going to be swatting at them. So my philosophy on small hive beetles is to try to break the breeding cycle to the point that if I miss a hive or anything, that they don't have a place to pupate. And the way I'm doing that is with a chemical treatment in the ground. And this is with a chemical that some people have talked about. It is I guess you would call it a pesticide. So it is something, but it does not go in the hive. The name of the active ingredient is called chlorantraniliprole. And chlorantraniliprole has been used in the golf turf industry for decades to manage grubs and larvae in golf courses. And there are academic papers that have studied their LD50 or their toxicity to honeybees. And all of the current documentation that has been studied with chlorantraniliprole, they are not toxic to honeybees. There are some side effects to crayfish and fish in water if you happen to live near any ponds or streams or things where this chemical could get into that water. There could be a side effect of that. So I'm not going to say this is some organic thing that doesn't hurt anything and only kills the small hive beetle larva. But it does go in your turf, much like if you treat your lawn for mole crickets or anything else. This is a similar type of treatment that you might do in the vicinity of your hives. This product is also available like at Lowe's and Home Depot in a product called Grubex. Now, there are some of these products that do have an active ingredient that is different than chlorantraniliprole. So maybe look at the label or do your own research on this if you're interested in thinking about this. And then there are some liquid products that can be purchased online that have an active ingredient that are done with a dilution and spray type of solution onto the grass or the areas in the vicinity of the hive. So my thought process on this is that manage the small hive beetles as best you can actively, whether or not you have traps in your hive. And I do have those little traps in there, and put some little oil in there and bait them up so that hopefully I catch a few. But more than anything, I don't want them to be able to pupate. And if they do go pupate, they're never going to come back out as small hive beetles, because I've stopped the process of them being able to that life cycle in the ground. This does not go in the hive. But this is the point I was talking about. Dr. Bartlett at the University of Georgia is looking at chlorantraniliprole. He has some students doing some research on this. He has made a couple YouTube videos talking about it. So there's probably, I think he was trying to get a grant the last time I heard him mention it. I don't know the success of that grant, but I think there's some, because it has such a low toxicity to honeybees, there possibly could be a commercial application of this product for some usage in the hive. And I don't know where that will go. And I hope to learn more with him or with Dr. Ellis and his team down at the University of Florida, perhaps next year or the year after. That's my small hive beetle story.
Yeah, definitely. I do want we got a couple questions here, but I do want to thank Joseph Rawls, me again, Joey, for $10 donation. I appreciate you very much.
Joey.
And
Yeah, that's nice of him.
me again, Joey. And the first question here is from Michael Buck, and he asks, do you use a variety of essential oils in your beekeeping experiments? I'm using a mixture of wintergreen, sugar honey, and Crisco to make a beetle grease mixture that Ken Davis done back 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of beetle grease solutions. I don't use any essential oils for anything other than swarm trap lures that I make in the springtime. So I do make my own swarm trap lures with some, basically some lemongrass, and there's a few other little oils I use, but lemongrass is the basic one. And I do some impregnation in some agar and sometimes in some gelatin to make some long-lasting swarm trap lures. But I don't use beetle grease, but a lot of people do. And I do think it can be successful. It's messy. It is a little bit of a, the bees don't see, this kind of goes back to, you're going to put candy, the peppermints, or all these things in your hive. And there's been a lot of people reported anecdotal success with a lot of these. To answer your question simply, I don't do that, but it's not because I found it doesn't work. It's just, I've gone another direction, and maybe I need to learn a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, I get you. The next question is from DC's Bees, and he says, Chuck, have you tried Hop Guard? I hear the first few versions were a mess, but their third version is kind of okay.
Yeah, I have not used it in several years. Like I said, I've gone on to oxalic acid, but I do want to continue to try products that are affordable and usable in small, kind of scenarios for small apiaries. And I do love to hear reports that it's getting better, right? Because I have had, bad experiences in the past, and perhaps I shouldn't let my own history completely taint a product over time if there are anecdotal stories of it getting better. So I'm not currently using it, but maybe after seeing that comment, I will try it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The next topic I want to talk about, I never really talk about it on our live streams, but I figured we'd kind of bring it up since we've been talking about varroa mites and all these different things on beetles. And I kind of want to talk about a couple of diseases that, sometimes are rare, but beekeepers still get. I just kind of want to ask you some of your opinions on them. Have you ever had any experience with them? And, European foul brood, American foul brood, some of these different diseases. Do you have any experience with them? Have you ever came across them? And what are some things that you could probably tell our viewers that could help them out?
Yeah, I've had American foul brood once, and my local bee inspector found it. It was in my third year, and I'll have to say, at that point in my journey, I didn't know it. There is a way of testing for foul brood, and you kind of take a skinny little stick and you stick it in the cappings, and if you pull the ooze out and it's very, very stringy, you got foul brood in there. So it's a quick little test. And some experienced beekeepers can smell it, or you get an odor from a hive that, I don't want to say it's the foul brood that smells bad, but it's definitely the absence of the normal hive smell that's not there. And the inspectors, and I will also give a shout out to the bee inspectors in each of our states. This is what they're there for. They're not there to come, give you a fine, or to come, put handcuffs on you and take you to jail. That's not the purpose. The purpose of a bee inspector in each state is to ensure the health of the hives of the agricultural industry of that state, and that some, small beekeeper or a large beekeeper doesn't accidentally introduce a larger problem into the state's population. So they are the canary in the coal mine out there looking for these diseases and trying to mitigate them before it gets too bad. So make friends with your local inspector, allow them to look in your hives as freely as they possibly can, because they're going to be the experience that finds these things. In my one situation, he had told me that they had found American foul brood about 2 miles from my location, and more than likely I was infected through cross robbing or some other cross infection with that hive that was nowhere near my apiary. He took my entire hive. We put it in a fire pit, and he made me burn it in front of him. He wasn't even going to say burn that after I leave. He made me burn it while he was there. And as a new beekeeper, throwing boxes that you paid money for, and brood that you worked hard, and wax that you worked hard to grow, and watching those little creatures that we work so hard to take care of, stay on that honeycomb till they actually burn up themselves. It's, the emulation of a honeybee is kind of a sad thing to watch when you have to burn a hive for the first time. But that's the way that the beekeeping industry has decided to manage that problem. I don't know that there's a better solution. I know it's heart-wrenching to watch the first time it happens. So I've had it. I haven't had it since. I think that's more luck than anything, because I'm not doing anything specifically to avoid it. I think it's just management as the larger ecosystem that the state's trying to do to keep up small little problems at bay. And I guess I'd go back to identification. The better you can educate yourself to, thinking maybe I've got it, then you could go ask your bee inspector to come out if you start to smell something or see something that's stringy. But it does sort of take an experienced beekeeper probably to identify it for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I have never had it before, and I don't want it, but I've definitely studied up on it in some different courses and stuff when I was a little bit more of a beginner beekeeper. And actually recently too, I just kind of opened up some books, and I kind of just went over some things that maybe I forgot that I actually learned and when I got into beekeeping. So I've all those tests and stuff that you've talked about, I've learned those things, and um um actually recently too, just to make sure I know it. If the sunken brood and stuff like that, and being able to find
Yeah.
that and locate it and be able to know it. But I have not had it, and I don't want it either. So
Yeah.
I haven't had it, and
Learn skill for a beekeeper to look at his or her brood with a critical eye for problems they might have. Typically, when you're holding up your frame and you put your back to the sun so you can look on there, you're looking for the queen, and just something in the back of your brain is bragging about how great you've done. It's a little hard to look for problems in your own hive. So you got to objectively actively monitor, is a term I use in aviation a lot. You have to look at it with a different lens. You have to look at it, from somebody that's trying to find something wrong, just so you could be, self-critical perhaps, and don't ignore something that's right in front of your face.
oh yeah, definitely. Now on the next topic, I kind of want to focus a little bit on some new beekeepers. We may have new beekeepers in the chat. I'm not really sure, but I know we have a lot of experienced beekeepers. But I just kind of wanted to ask you if you have any tips or anything that any advice that you'd like, if you could give to any new beginner beekeepers who are getting into beekeeping. What would be some advice that you would tell them?
Yeah, I always tell new beekeepers, and beekeepers call me all the time, and want to get into the hive. And sometimes they saw the Flow Hive advertisement or read it in a magazine, and they think beekeeping is just going to be buying this hive and turning the crank, and honey's going to come into your jars. As soon as they start talking about the Flow Hive, I can pretty quickly realize they're just wanting this to be easy and get honey. So I usually go into beekeeping is a little bit more like farming than gardening. So to kind of get their mindset into taking care of animals, and then I need to kind of talk to them about, it's not as simple as just putting bees in a box and watching them grow. You have to manage them like you would a horse or chickens or anything like that. And you have, it's not that you can't leave them be for a little while, but you can't just set it and forget it. So I try to get that mindset into a new beekeeper that doesn't have hives yet. And once they're committed to getting hives, I'm like, great. You can't start with less than 2 is my default answer. I'm like, if you start with less than 2 hives, you're going to isolate problems. You're not going to be able to isolate problems that are right in front of your face. And Grayson, I don't know if you ever had this situation when you were just down to a couple of hives, but you look at one hive and you look at the other and you go, wow, something's just not right with that one over there. It just doesn't look like that one. And if you've only got one hive, you don't have anything to compare it against. You can blame it on anything. You can blame it on the weather. You can blame it on your queen. You can blame it on anything. But if there's a hive right next to it that looks really good and a hive, that's dying right next to it, you can sort of objectively say, I've got a problem. And I think that is very, very important for a new beekeeper. And additionally, once you have 2 hives, you get the benefit of sharing resources, equalization. You can steal a frame of brood. You can steal some eggs. You can kind of keep another hive going. So 2 hives is a critical strategic important thing for a new beekeeper, but it does also double the hardware expense and things like that, and the space perhaps they didn't initially think of putting the beehive right next to their bird bath and their small little garden out in the front yard. I'm like, okay, well, if that's what you're thinking about, maybe this isn't what you should be doing anyway. These kind of need to be out here where you're going to walk back and see them a little bit later. And then the last thing I talk about once beekeepers kind of get a little bit more experience, this is kind of year 2, year 3, year 4 kind of a time frame, is like I mentioned earlier, you got to plan on your backup resources, and you need a backup for every single hive. That's my rule. You could do with a little bit less, you could do with a 40% backup, but the number one thing young beekeepers come to me for is emergency queens. Oh, my queen died. And then of course they go online and nobody's still selling queens when they need one. And not having a queen when you need it, and too late to raise their own, like right now, if you were to try to raise a queen right now, you're kind of done for the season. But if you had a 3-frame nuke or a 5-frame nuke sitting over there, you could do that, introduction, and that could be your strongest hive next year just because you were ready for it. Now, granted, a brand new year 1 beekeeper is not probably going to be ready to have that 3- and 5-frame nuke for every single hive, but I do like to set the mindset for new beekeepers that having those little nucleus boxes ready to do a split in the spring and to plan on keeping them there and going by themselves is important. And you know what? Okay, let the 5-frame nukes swarm. That's fine. You're still going to have bees there. You don't need to necessarily worry about all of that. So those are the things I think I've learned to talk to new beekeepers about, is get them in the right mindset. It's more farming than gardening. Make sure they understand the numbers of hives they're going to need. Probably talk about the flow hive as their first hive, because it glorifies what beekeeping is before they're ready for it, in my mind. I had a flow hive. I don't use it anymore because it was too finicky and my equipment doesn't match. But I tried it and I learned about it. And I now see the attraction why people reading in a magazine and thinking about getting into beekeeping, that would be how they would want to start. But I think it is also setting people up for failure, because when you put a box of brood underneath that big old flow frame on the top, the last thing you want to do is pull that flow frame off the top to get into the deep box below to check for Varroa mites. It's just, you kind of setting a hive up to never get into and inspect it. And that leads to failure pretty quickly. So anyway, that probably answered your question a little bit longer than you thought.
Oh, no problem. Definitely. And, we were actually thinking about, getting into Flow Hive a couple years back, but then we just kind of got away from the idea because, like you said, and it's costly too. It's a lot of money too for just one hive. So we figured,
Yeah.
maybe not, because we just have our regular equipment. It'd be much more easier. It'd be much more efficient just doing our regular setup, even though, of course, I know a lot of beekeepers will say it, doing a flow hive is much more easier. You don't have to get an extractor and all this different stuff. But the thing is that I've always looked about, when we're kind of comparing to flow hives and to just regular setups, is that you could just get an extractor for less, a lot of times less than what the flow hive costs. And, you can get much more honey from that. and you also have spare money also to go get your equipment and some other things that you might need for honey production. That's what
Yeah.
I've always looked at.
How do I guess I don't want this to be a bash and flow hives because there is a good place for it. And
Oh
let
yeah,
me try to create the storyline of a flow hive is a great third hive. It's a great fourth hive, right? You know, you already learned to beekeep. You already know how to handle your brood. Maybe even did the mashing into the nets, and you did the crush and strain method for a year or two to get some honey out of your hives, and you know kind of how it works. But most importantly, you learn how to manage the hive, manage the brood, manage the queen, manage the pests before you put this big fancy thing on top that makes the extraction process, which is really about 25% of a beekeeper's tasks of a year, right? It's not the most. Most of it's everything else. So just don't put this big fancy thing on top of your hive and never get in the bottom because you're just waiting on that honey to start flowing. And that's where most beekeepers start this dream of getting into it. And I just want to make sure they get in the brood chamber before they start thinking about turning that knob and getting that golden honey out.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's the same mindset that I've always had. And right now, we just run like I said, normal stuff. I don't know what exact extractor we have. I think it's like about an 8 frame, maybe around there. It's electric, so we actually recently used it. And before we used it this year, we actually didn't use it for like 2 to 3 years. It was a while. So I was like, whenever I was gonna go in there and check it, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if it works. So before I even got it out and started to clean it, I made sure it worked because I didn't want to do all
Yeah.
that work and get out there and it ends up not working. So I tested it out. It works. It worked really, really good. And the only problem I had with the extractor a little bit was we actually did the extraction outside, and at some point we need to find a better way to do it
Mm.
because we did it during the derf, and oh, the bees were everywhere,
No.
and the bees were
Yeah,
everywhere.
that doesn't work.
Yeah, we were able to get the honey, but we got to figure out something next year.
Yeah,
But we're able to finally able to do it. It took a little bit, but number one problem was the bees were everywhere, and they were trying to get into the honey, and we had a lot of honey in there, a lot of bees in there. Um, but it ended up doing okay. But we need to do something more efficient and much better.
yeah,
Next time we extract. And then the second problem was when we had our extractor on the ground, it kept on wobbling and stuff because it was going so fast. That's the main problem we had the last 2 times we extracted was it just kept on bobbling around because we didn't have it tightened to the ground. So we have
yeah,
to because it has holes in there where you can tighten it to the ground. So we're gonna have to. What I really want to do is get like a honey house, something like that, at some
yeah.
point when our operation grows a little bit more and be able to move everything kind of more inside and be able to put the extractor in one place and go on
Yeah.
and screw it in, and it won't be um bobbling or anywhere.
A couple ideas for you there. Obviously, I don't have a honey house, but I do have like a shed where all my power tools and my saws are, and I kind of turn that into a honey house when I extract. So I am able to close the door. But some ideas for you there. At pretty inexpensively at places like Harbor Freight or other places like that, you could probably find some portable um, paint sort of tent structures. So something you might erect over a car if you were going to paint a car. So it would create like a little bit of a tent sort of a structure, and you might be able to at least keep most of the bees out. You're still going to be
Yeah.
outside. They'll find their way in, but you might be able to kind of zip yourself into a little bit of a tent. That would help. And then for the wobbling, I have a big piece of lumber that mine is bolted to. So essentially, I just stick a dolly underneath it and lift the whole thing. So imagine like a nice 2 or 3 inch piece of plywood. You could probably use a regular piece of plywood too and bolt that down. But then the whole piece of plywood is your base. And if it's still wobbling and you've got it on a piece of plywood, it doesn't have to be a full sheet of plywood. Maybe you can cut it down in half or a little bit less than half. But then you could put some weight on the plywood to hold the plywood down, and then the extractor is bolted to the plywood. So you got a little bit of a flat surface that would give you a little bit of stability there. Just some ideas
Oh yeah.
for your scenario.
Yeah, definitely. You know what? I never thought about the tent. We'll have to do that next time. That actually sounds like a really good idea. So thank you there, and good idea there. And that's probably what we'll do because right this second I don't really want to try to get a big honey house or anything because we're
Yeah,
just a small operation. But once we start growing, and if we start growing big time, then we'll kind of look into that. But for time being, that'd be a pretty good
yeah.
idea.
They
Look,
sell lots of different things. Like they even sell greenhouses, but that's probably a little bit more expensive than you
yeah.
even need to spend. A little portable. I put up a little portable greenhouse here in Jacksonville, even just to keep the things that can't tolerate freezes, plants, and things like that. But I would imagine just some sort of small little Tyvek material, like a painter's suit would wear, but you have it over a little bit of a structure. It's probably gonna be a few $100s, but it sure is cheaper than a whole honey house.
Oh yeah, definitely. But one thing I do know about these live streams is, they go by really quick. We're almost already to the end here. It just goes by really quick. So I guess we'll kind of start ending off here in just a quick second. I just wanted to real quick thank you for coming on here tonight. It's been really fun chatting with you tonight and answering some questions and talking about bees, right? It's just always
Yeah.
fun talking about bees, and I really appreciate you joining us.
Well, great. So I know you've been hounding me down for a few months, and we tried to make it happen in the spring, and it didn't. But
Yeah.
you stuck with me, and we made it happen here in September, and I'm really glad to do it. And it's a journey. Every season is different, and
Right.
glad to come on again in the future, or who knows, maybe I'll see you at the expo or somewhere around where maybe we'll run into each other.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the next couple of months, we'll kind of look into doing it again. Try to set something up sometime, maybe next year if we can.
Great.
All
Sounds
right,
good,
definitely.
Grayson.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a good night.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.